In the previous lecture, we created the main logic for the spin now action that's triggered whenever somebody presses the spin button. Now, we have basically another action that's getting called within the spin now, which is the prepare next spin. So that's what we're going to be doing. And then we have the update action. But now let's work on the prepare next spin. Okay, so what do we want to prepare here? Okay, so before spinning, we want to know how many times we're going to spin this each of the slot machine columns, right? So the left one, the middle one, and the right one. So we need to be able to track how many spins we want and how many spins we're about to have. So before even getting there, let's create those variables. So go all the way up top, and after the total score right here, press enter a couple times, and we're gonna write them down, okay? So we want a variable for the number of times to spin the column on the left side, right? So let's call this one number of times to spin column left, okay? So that's the number of times we want to spin the column left. And every time it's going to change, it's going to be random, right? Because the first time you play, you want X number of times, the second time you want Y number of times, and the third time you want Z number of times. So you want it to be different every time. You don't want to know how many times it's about to spin. You want to add some randomness, okay? So this is going to be an integer because it's a whole number, and by default it's going to be 0 times. It's not going to spin anytime. So that's for the left one. Now let's create the middle one and the right one. So I'm going to write middle, and here I'm going to write right. Okay, now we also want to keep track of what's the current number of time it's spinned already, okay? To know if we want to stop the spin or not. So variable column left current spin count, okay? So we're basically counting the number of times it's spinned already, and that's going to be an integer as well, and by default it's going to be 0. Now obviously we're going to do this for the middle and the right column. So instead of left, I'm going to put middle here, and here I'm going to put right. Okay, so we will go with that. So now let's go back to the spin now function and the prepare to spin, right? Prepare the next spin. And here now let's use the variables we have. So we want to add some like I just said earlier, some randomness, okay? So let's have a minimum and maximum number of spin counts, okay? So we want to do is say how many times at most we want it to spin, or how many times we want it to spin at most or at least, okay? So we probably want it to spin at most 130 times and a minimum of 115 times. So what I could do right now is also create two more variables. So go up and just type variable for variable max spin count, and obviously that's going to be an integer, okay, and the value is going to be 130, okay, and then var min spin count, so the minimum times it needs to spin, and that's going to be obviously an integer, and let's say the minimum is going to be 115. Now this is up to you. You can change that. If you want it to spin longer, you can add more a bigger value. If you want it to spin less, just lower these. But the minimum needs to be always less than the maximum, okay? Makes sense, right? So now let's go back to the prepare next spin, okay? And right there, what we want to do is create a variation. So var variation is, and that's going to be an int as well, okay? And the variation is equal to the max spin count minus the minimum spin count. Okay, so technically we know what's the difference between the maximum and the minimum, and we're going to create a random value in between. So variable random number rnd num1, okay, so random number is equal to an integer of now let's call an action that's called arc4random. That's part of the that comes of the framework to create random numbers, uint for uinteger 32, and we're gonna create, so uint 32, and we're gonna create a variable. We're gonna create a random number from the variation, okay, and close all these extra parentheses. Okay, so let me just put some extra space so you guys can see what's going on. Okay, all right, better. So u int, like that. Okay, so we're creating a random number that's going to be between the maximum and the minimum. So it's going to be between 130 and 115. So what we got to do is that the number of times to spin the column left is equal to the minimum spin count plus that randomness. Okay, all right. Now what we want to do is we want to make sure we want to create the same again and again for each column. So this is the first column. We're going to do the same for the second column and the third column. Okay, so that's it for the first column. So let me just put it here. Now I'm just gonna copy this, okay, and change that for the second column. Instead of column left, it will be column right. So random number 2, and that's gonna be column middle, and random 2. Okay, so we're doing the same thing, but this time it's for the number of times to spin the middle column. Okay, now let's do the same thing for the right column. So random 3, okay, and random 3, and we're gonna do this to the right column. Okay, so now we've assigned 3 values, the one for the left, middle, and right. Now we want to make sure that we're inside of the number of images we have. We have 20 images. I know because we added the images, so we don't want to be above our images. So what we're gonna do is if the number of times, so please bear with me because this is a little bit of more involved in math, of time, and the remainder of 20 images %2 is equal to 1. So that means if it's an odd number, we don't want a number, we want a number of spin, we want an even number of spin all the time. So we go number of spin column left is equal to itself plus 1. So now we know that it's only going to be even numbers of spin. I'm just going to copy this and paste it below the other ones, but this time it's going to be middle here, okay, and here middle as well, and here we're going to paste it below, and this time it's going to be the right one, right, and right. Okay, so each of the columns can only spin an even number of times. Okay, so we'll know that it will end up on the right image that we want. Okay, so this is pretty much it for the prepare to spin. Oh, there's one more thing we want to actually do is reset the number of spin counts. We want the spin count, the actual number of times it currently spinned, to be 0 because it hasn't spinned yet. It's about to spin. So we're going to put column left current spin count equals 0, then column middle spin count equals 0, and column right spin count is also equal to 0. Okay, and at this point we're done with the prepare next spin. Now the next video lecture we're gonna create the update function. That's gonna be a little bit more involved, but we're on the right track. See you guys on the next lecture.